All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me get some water going here. We left off yesterday with the Currency Act, so we're going to start back with that. Remember, this is a series of progression, mostly of taxation that's occurring. Sugar and molasses tax. Colonists pushed back. They mostly evaded those taxes by smuggling. Writs of assistance is issued in order to combat the smuggling. Who argued that it's a violation of natural rights and it's taxation without representation is tyranny? Who argued that case? James Otis Jr. What did John Adams say about his 5-hour speech? Just paraphrase. The birth of liberty was established right there. September 1st, 1764, Parliament passes the Currency Act. It effectively assumed control of the colonial currency system, and it established a, quote, superior, close quote, vice admiralty court, which is a naval court, military court. It's one thing to be taxed, it's another thing also to have a court system where you no longer get a jury of your peers. Because in a military court, you don't get a jury of your peers. The military officer is judge and executioner. So, in addition, the Currency Act, Harlan, the Currency Act prohibited the issuing of any new bills and the reissue of existing currency. Parliament favored hard currency, a system based on the pound sterling, which is the great island of Great Britain's currency system. Parliament could not regulate the colonial bills, so they abolished them altogether. The colonies protested against this, and as a result, they suffered a trade imbalance against Great Britain. They argued the shortage of hard capital, being the sterling, would further make the situation worse. So I'll give you an example. Right now, one US dollar is worth 6.75 of the Chinese yuan. Maybe I'm not calling the Chinese money correctly. Chinese dollar. Just call it that for short. So one of my dollars would get me 6.75 of theirs. So our value is worth a lot. So think of us as Great Britain. The colonies wants to pay their debts with the colonial money that is only worth 1 or 5.6. Takes 5.6 of theirs to equal our 1. But if I owe $1 to Great Britain, I want to give them one of my dollars. But is it worth $1 in Great Britain? No. I need 6.75 to make it worth the dollar that I actually owe. So they abolished the colonial system, so they did not have this kind of discrepancy. The problem is, though, the only way you're going to get the pound sterling is you have to purchase from great goods and services from Great Britain with the pound sterling, of which you don't have in the first place. Remember yesterday, I talked about what happens when we send our dollar, when we buy something from China, made in China at Walmart. That dollar ends up in China. China does not hardly buy anything from the United States. That dollar does not come back. We have to buy products from them using the dollar, but they don't buy from us. That's the trade deficit. More of our dollars leave this country never to return because it stays in China. When I use the American money, our dollars, In China, I could bargain right all day long, and they were like salivating when they would see a U.S. dollar. If I had regular Chinese money, they didn't get too excited. So I could purchase things with U.S. money, especially on the street, or with their money. They really liked American money. So, for example, when I took a ride on a rickshaw, back now they use bikes, like a three-wheeled bike kind of deal instead of being pulled, how in the old days they would pull you while they would like run. Well, now they got a bicycle that they use on kind of like when you see an elderly man riding around in town or something with a big three-wheel. So I tipped the guy $20 US, $20 bill. That was probably more money than he made in a month. He was just absolutely ecstatic. I'm hoping he went and took a shower. He was really dirty. But, I mean, I can't tell you the gratitude that he had to me handing him a $20 bill. That was me. The lady who rode with me, she probably close to the same gave him. So, I'm trying to get across how much more valuable our money is, like it would have been with Great Britain. The sterling pound is worth much more than the continental money. You can do much more with it, buy much more purchasing power. Let's see here. I think the euro is worth more, because I was just checking the other day. It's like 87 cents. Our dollar's worth 87 cents euros. It's not cents, 87. I don't know how they call their currency, but the euro is like ours is dollar. Theirs is in Europe is euros. 87 cents of their money is equal to $1 of our. No, excuse me. Let me go the other way. If I gave them $1, it's worth 87 cents over there. So it's worth more over there. In fact, I was just reading, there's more Europeans coming to the United States on vacation because their euros get them further over here. And less Americans are going to Europe because it's costing more for the travel and for the sightseeing because it takes more U.S. dollars. Whereas if I went to China, the average person on retirement could live very well in China because our money is worth so much more. Versus somebody living on Chinese income coming here, they'd be dead broke, just absolutely horrendously broke. So, let's see here. All right. I got a few more things about the Currency Act here. The colonies were in the middle of a depressed economy during this time period following the 7 Years' War. The Sugar Act not only restricted the colonists' exports, but gave an economic advantage to the British West Indies, reinforced the second-class status which they often attribute to the colonist British mainlanders. In other words, because they are being set up economically to be in a lesser condition or lesser opportunity, they see themselves once again as being second-class British citizens. This is an insult to them. We're natural-born Englishmen. We're not second-class. And being a natural-born Englishman, having English rights, it's something that is very sacred to them. And they're feeling like these are starting to get watered down here. This is not, we should have this exact same opportunity as anyone else in the British Empire who are British. So this second-class citizenship feeling will play a major role for the next 15 years. In fact, in their writings, in the founders' writings, you'll see this mentioned quite often. They felt like they were being treated as second-class citizens. All right. Nowadays, we hear of the Tea Party, especially during President Obama's administration. Tea Party, anti-Obama. They often fly this flag when they go to different events. This flag right up here, the "Don't Tread on Me" with the yellow background, that's called the Gladstone flag. But the Tea Party actually was birthed much long ago. It's a grassroots opposition to tyranny that took shape. It was a means of communication on issues that needed collective attention. So the first thing that they did was establish a committee of correspondence. Remember, there's no Facebook, there's no Twitter, there's no phones, there's no telegraphs. There's no good roads to get from one colony to another. There is no good way to communicate, so they established a committee of correspondence who would write or draft letters, pamphlets to be distributed all over the colonies. This committee of correspondence sparked anti-government protest throughout the colonies. A lot like Twitter does now and Facebook. You can get your message out very quickly with social media. In fact, Iran, every once in a while they have these little uprisings. And the Iranian, what are they called? The opposition to the tyranny there, not freedom fighters. It might be the Green Party is what they're called. But when they have their street demonstrations, they will use Twitter to communicate with the world to show what the Iranian military and government's doing to them. Because they'll come in and just mow them down with machine guns. And we wouldn't know about it in the West if it wasn't for social media. And we can find out about it in real time. Which, the last time this happened, people all over the world spoke up against it and the government backed off. But what they have done now is they have put blocks on Twitter in Iran where unless you're computer savvy and you know how to get around it, they block a lot of that communication from the outside world. China is a master at that. You cannot use Google or Google email in China. They totally block the Facebook too. You have to have a different kind of Facebook over there, and a lot of people will go through Hong Kong's version. But that kind of stuff is not allowed in China because they don't want information to the people. And they certainly don't want the rest of us to know what's happening in China when the government cracks down. A lot of those people in China have no idea about other countries and freedoms. When I went to China, my trip was paid for by the Chinese government. Their goal was to bring American and Canadian teachers there to show us that they were not our enemy, and that we would bring it back to the classroom to teach you that they are not the enemy. Well, I agree with the tour guide. Chinese people are not our enemy. Their government is. Flat out. Huh? Oh, no. He understands the communist problem. I was quite impressed with what he knew. But he was very, how he told us was very scripted. Let's put it that way. The government told him what to say. And there was never a time that I did not think or feel that we were being followed. So, and that's very common for Westerners, to be followed by the Chinese to see where they're going. They even took photocopies of our passports at the hotel, and they tried to tell us it's for our safety. It's not for our safety. It's in case the police show up and want to know, is this guy here? And they can take a look at the photocopy. Yep, we seen him walk by. He should be in his room. So, we had to. You're in their country. You do what you're told. Because remember, you don't have constitutional rights there. You don't even get a right to a trial or even to know why you're being arrested in China. They just put you in jail. Just don't do what you're not supposed to do. Well, that can happen. Yeah, if they think you're there, the moment that I really realized, that's right, I'm in China. I was standing at Tiananmen Square, right in the middle, and I'm looking around trying to figure out which way the tanks came from. In I think it's 1989, nobody really knows how many citizens were killed by the army, but some people say as many as 10,000. Some say 3,000. Nobody really knows. But a lot of people were killed by the military. Some of them were ran over by the tanks. A lot of them were just shot. But they were trying to get to Tiananmen Square to protest the government. And I'm standing there because in the Western media, it looked like it was all right there around Tiananmen Square. And I'm trying to figure out which way did the tanks come. And that was the only place I went through a military checkpoint, was at that square. They checked my bags and looked me over and stuff. And I remember waving over with the tour guide, and Bai Young was his name. He comes over. I go, which way did the tanks come? And I said it like an idiot out loud. Which way did the tanks come? And he looked at me with a really funny face and just shook his head and walked off. Now, there's lots of Chinese people walking around with cameras and taking pictures and stuff, because this is the government center. That would be our capital, was right across the way. You could see a huge building. Mao's tomb is on the other end, and the Forbidden City is right behind us. And so there's lots of people there. And later that day, we got on the bus. And first of all, I said, well, that's weird. He's never shied away from talking about Chinese history with me. And he got on the bus with us later that day, and he sat down and he goes, most of the incident happened up the road. Tanks never got here, and it never happened. Huh? What do you mean? He goes, we don't ever talk about it, and it's called the Tiananmen problem, not Tiananmen Square massacre like we call it. And he goes, most Chinese have never heard of it, never even knew it happened, because they closed all of the news media down and shut the TVs down, the TV stations, when that was going on. And only those who lived in the area even knew anything about it. Oh, and then he went on to say, oh, by the way, most of those that you think are Chinese tourists are not. They're secret police. And they're looking for people like me who's going to go there and talk about Tiananmen Square. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That's why he walked away, would not talk about it. Yep. There's 2 people from Boise who was arrested about 10 years ago for handing out information about Tiananmen Square at Tiananmen Square. And had the president not got involved at the time, who knows how long they would have stayed in jail. But they will never be allowed back in China. They will never be allowed. So I think they were foolish for doing that, because I think you could have did more work by not getting kicked out than making a big scene. But anyways, don't get caught stealing in China. Do not do that. Oh, you'd go to jail. Put it this way, just simple drug convictions will get you executed. Yep. And they don't care whether you're male or female. So, and typically their executions are gunshots to the back of the head, even today. So, all right. All right, Committee of Correspondence. All right, here. So, as a result, Parliament clamps down on the colonists even further. They issue 2 additional acts. First, the Stamp Act and the Quartering Act. As a result of the Committee of Correspondence actions, which led to protest against the government and further evading of taxes, Parliament clamps down even further. Oh yeah? You don't like these taxes? Well, we're going to give you something you're really not going to like. You are going to pay this debt. So, a little bit of background for the Stamp Act. Great Britain is faced with a huge debt after the 7 Years' War. They had to take a lot of loans. Well, how much loan did they have to take, Mr. Moffat? Thank you for asking. Their debt had grown from $516 million in 1755 to $23 billion in 1764. That's in today's money, today's value. The English citizens in Great Britain was taxed at a very high rate in order to pay the debt. The English citizens in North America were not. As a result, the British citizens on the island is threatening to revolt themselves. So Parliament needs to do something to make this a little more fair. Seems reasonable, except for one thing. Two things, actually, we're going to find out here in a minute. One of them you should already know. What's the first issue? Yes, but bigger than that. Think about fundamental rights. Taxation without representation. The colonists don't have a problem with taxes. What they have a problem with is being taxed without representation. They have no say in it. That's the issue. And remember, the Magna Carta makes it very clear. Taxation with representation. Parliament is to tax. Parliament is representative government. Do the colonists have members sitting in Parliament? No, they do not. That's the fundamental problem here. March 8, 1765, the Stamp Act is passed. It's designed to raise revenue from the American colonies by a duty tax in the form of a stamp required nearly on every piece of paper. This is the most significant part of this whole time period. It is the first direct tax levied on the American colonists. This isn't just levied on imports and only a few people who's buying the product. This is not levied on just molasses. Not everybody would need molasses. This is levied directly on everyone in the colonies. And moreover, remember the other taxes, think of it this way. It's a naval tax. This is stuff that is taxed already in the colonies. Stuff that is produced in the colonies now are taxed. This is the first time this has happened. This is Parliament's first serious attempt to assert governmental authority over the 13 colonies. Why would I star those? Oh, yeah. What is the significance of the Stamp Act? It is, Mr. Moffat, the significance of the Stamp Act is, it is the first direct tax levied on the colonists, and it is Parliament's, which, by the way, that's the most important of those two. The second important part is it's Parliament's first serious attempt to control the colonies. Mr. Moffat. If he's going to take both, has he failed both? Yeah, first 2 weeks is A, second 2 weeks is B, but it's my understanding the only way they can take it, it has to be credit recovery, so they have to have failed it the first time in regular school. Yep. All right, thanks. All right. Don't forget the significance of the Stamp Act. So, some of the things, you don't have to write this down. I wanted to give you, this is nothing more than an example of some of the things that they taxed. Legal documents, certificate of marriages, so you couldn't even get married. Couldn't get your diploma, you're from college. fact, the colonists often would call this a knowledge tax, because you'll see how much it cost here on the next slide. But it might, like $1,700 just to get your college diploma in our dollars today. So that's, even today, we would protest. There's no way I'm paying another $1,700 in May to get my diploma. No way, because I've already paid a ton of money. But think about this. If the government was to tax me to get my diploma for that kind of money. Ships papers, licenses. I find this interesting. They really threw a fit about the dice and the playing cards. Pamphlets, advertisements, contracts, calendars, writs, donations. They're taxing just about anything that you require to have written, in written form. So, some of the expenses. Attorney license, $1,700, this is in today's dollars, $1,700. Administrative court papers, anywhere from $2 to $88. Let's say you want to go buy some land. It's going to cost you, in addition to anything under 100 acres, in addition to the land, you could be paying up to $44 in tax just for that piece of paper granting you ownership. Up to just the paper. This is the stamp you got to have on that contract, on that deed. Pack of playing cards, $8.33. Playing cards today don't even cost that much, never mind tax. Dice, $88 in tax. Apparently, dice was a hot commodity back then. Newspapers cost you 37 cents. A newspaper today is 50 cents without the tax. Sell booze, 177. I tell you, bars today would like for this tax to be 177 today. Gives an idea of what it cost back then. So we're going to talk about how did you pay for it? Well, the Stamp Act demonstrates an appropriate tax had to be paid in British currency, either in gold or silver. That's considered hard currency, not paper currency. And the silver would be referred to as the silver pound or the silver sterling. Could not use colonial dollars. You can't use French money. You have to use gold or silver coinage that is only minted in Great Britain. Yes? Go ahead. We will have a break. Perhaps. So, what if you don't pay the tax? What if you go and buy some land and you don't go and get the stamp? Well, you will definitely lose the land if you get caught. But you could be fined up to $3,500. If you have counterfeit documents, that was the death sentence. Yep. More importantly, though, your trial would be done without a jury and be done in the admiralty courts. What's the problem with that? That's right, violation of our ancient rights. Can you see how this is starting to build up, where these colonials are going to be going, hey, wait a minute here. We have rights. You're ignoring our rights. Just the colonials. That's the second-class citizenship feeling that they're getting. This only applies to them in North America. And the tax is only in North America. The great people of Great Britain on the island, this doesn't apply to them. all because of where they live, they're getting taxed. Of course, they weren't going to stand by and not do something about it. This was seen as detrimental to the colonial America and sowed the seeds of dissension and rebellion in the colonies. The colonists, outraged in violent reaction to the Stamp Act, came to a great surprise to the British government. The British thought they had a right to enforce their trade policies and tax as the mother country. Parliament thought the colonists had become accustomed to a limited degree to the British regulation of trade and taxes. We don't understand why they're so upset. We're the British government. We have the right to do this. They do have the right to do this in all other places they have established, but not the North American colonies to start with. There's something we haven't yet discussed that makes it very unique in North America, although other places, India, Africa, will start asserting their rights after our revolution as well, because they're reminded, wait a minute, we too have these ancient liberties. All right. Our first major player is Patrick Henry. It's not a surprise, he's a Virginian. And he kicks off the American resistance. Some of you may be familiar with the "Give me liberty" or "Give me death" speech. We will listen to that in this class. But that is given by this young man. And I say young because he is the youngest member of the House of Burgess in Virginia. Obviously, he's much younger than he is in this painting. And he actually bucks the system because traditionally, when you're the new guy, you should sit down, shut up, and learn how to do it by the older guys. But he's a young attorney, and he doesn't follow the protocol, and he establishes, or I should say, proposes 5 resolutions. He originally proposes 7 resolutions, but only 5 is adopted. Later, one of those is repealed. The first thing he writes is Virginians brought to North America all the rights of Britons. That's the first point he makes. Virginians brought to North America all the rights of Britons. He's referring to those liberty documents. Everything those things established, all the liberties that established, they have those rights. Furthermore, the 2 royal charters reiterated this fact. Virginia went through 2 different charters. Both charters, signed by the king, made it very clear that they held these natural-born rights that Englishmen have. Just because they moved to North America and to Virginia, they did not. In fact, this was so important, they actually have it in writing in these charters. Third point, taxation only by representatives is the distinguishing characteristic of British freedom. Notice the quotes. The distinguishing characteristic of British freedom. So if I ask you that someday, what is the distinguishing characteristic of British freedom? It is taxation only by representation. You can word it a couple different ways. No other country did this. That's what makes it, that's why they feel so honored to be Britons. They have these recognized rights. Furthermore, Virginians had never yielded these rights. They came to North America with these rights, and during the 100, 200 years that they've been there, actually 150 years, they'd been in North America, they had never given up these rights. And finally, the Burgesses had the only exclusive right and power to tax Virginians. That is written in their charter as well. And the Burgesses is the representative government in Virginia, made up of Virginians, voted for by Virginians, chosen to make these decisions by Virginians for Virginians. The Burgesses had the only, notice that's in quotes, only exclusive right and power to tax Virginians. Anything rebellious about this? Huh? If he's citing facts, which is written by and signed by the king, is that rebellious? No, not at all. The king wrote it in his charter for them. That's all he's saying. These are the things in the charter that the king has agreed upon, and therefore Parliament has no power to override those. Basically is what they're saying. Any other pencils moving? All right. We're going to discuss a group of people called the Sons of Liberty. They use force to keep Stamp Acts from enforcing the law. We have an unfortunate series of events where Chief Justice Thomas Hutchison, who they thought was pro-British Stamp Act, the Sons of Liberty comes and nearly destroys his home as an intimidation factor, only to find out later he actually was supportive of the colonists. Oops. Our mistake, sorry. Hang on. There we go. Some of the things they would do is tar and feather a tax collector. Beat them up. Threaten to kill them. Tear their houses up. Throw rocks through their windows. Threaten their families. Anything to get them to decide, I don't think I want this job. And as long as there's no tax collector, there's no taxes being collected. Sons of Liberty are made up of guys like John Hancock, Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, not John Adams. John Adams disagrees with this tactic. You'll see that in the movie. Probably the first two parts. John Adams. Oh, it's a great movie. After these slides. No. 111 slides. What is that? Let's say up there, 29. Like the Committee of Correspondence, These individuals established the Stamp Act Congress. June 8th, 1765, the Massachusetts House of Representatives called for a Stamp Act Congress to convene in New York City. They met in New York October 7th through the 19th, adopted the Declaration of Rights and Grievances by John Dickerson. In it, it describes the duties of Englishmen. We have a duty to resist. We have a duty to educate Parliament and remind them of our rights that the King has signed. Part of those rights is taxation only by representation. However, we cannot be represented in Parliament. Why can't we be represented in Parliament? Say again? That's right. They don't have anybody from the colonies in Parliament. Nor is Parliament making any provisions to do so. Furthermore, only our legislators can constitutionally tax us. When I say constitutionally, technically England does not have a constitution, but their charters. Constitution is nothing more than written law. Notice it's not capital constitution. They have written law that the king has signed, authorizing only the colonial legislators is able to tax them. Those of you in U.S. history, where we watched the documentary yesterday, and that British officer, Braddock, is disgusted that he can't get the colonial legislators to tax their own people to pay for their war. He has to get them to tax themselves. They don't want to do that. Furthermore, we have a right to trial by jury. This is a direct attack on the admiralty courts. The recent measures are inconvenient, impractical, and unconstitutional. It's inconvenient because you're 3,000 miles away, or whatever it is, 3,000, 5,000, whatever it is across the Atlantic to England. It's impractical because if we need decisions made quickly, you're too far away to give us an answer, never mind getting a question to you. And more importantly, it's unconstitutional. Our charters is very clear that we have the power to make our own decisions, the authority to make our own decisions because of where you're located. We were given these rights to legislate ourselves by the king. Now, had England been closer, perhaps the king would have not did that. But on good weather, it takes you 6 weeks to get across the ocean to England. So if you have 12 good weeks, assuming that somebody would give you an answer within a day, in 12 weeks, which is 3 months, you could have an answer by then. If you were at war with the Indians or war with your neighboring or with France or Spain, you're already dead. You're already done. So the colonials have to be able to make decisions now. That's why they have their own power to legislate, their own power to draft military age, which everybody was considered, every man from like 14 or 16, up through 40 was considered part of the militia. You had no option. Unless you were, some reason say you were handicapped or something like that, where you really couldn't fight. You know, it takes 2 arms for the most part to load a musket. If you're missing a leg, that makes it tough to do the long marches. But the average healthy 14, 15-year-old up through 40 was considered part of the militia. So, just a quick review here. What is the difference? What was the difference between the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act? The answer is the same for all three. why was the reaction so strong to the Stamp Act, and why, and what was the significance of the Stamp Act? The answer is all the same, no matter how I ask it. Do you remember from yesterday? Or are you looking like that guy leaning on that question mark? Yeah, you weren't here, so. Those who were here, what is the significance, that should be the key word for you, of the Stamp Act? That answer answers the first two. Look in your notes. You got to get this question. If you do not understand this, you have failed miserably at understanding the first half of this unit. I wish I had the Jeopardy music. Let's see what I can find. What is the significance of the Stamp Act? Why would it cause such a outrage for So redefine that into one clean sentence. Janet? What about you? Say again? It certainly is that, but that is not the answer to the question. It is the first direct tax on all of the colonists. And yesterday. Yes, we did. We did the Stamp Act today. All right, I'm ahead of you. Sorry, I'm ahead of you. It is the significance of the Stamp Act is that it's the first direct tax on all of the colonists. And you could even go further and say all the colonists in the colonies. The other taxes that have been before the product got to the colonies. Import taxes. Now the products being made in the colonies is being taxed. The molasses and sugar was not made in the colonies. That came from somewhere else. That was taxed. And the colonists didn't really they didn't have a legal problem with that. They recognized the British government had the power to do that. What the significance is now they're taxing things that are made in the colonies. That's the significance. That's the first time the British government is attempting to do this. There you go. First direct tax on all the colonists. Previous policies and taxes had only been applied to specific types of trade and commerce in the different areas of the American colonies. Tax was introduced by a direct order from Britain without the approval of the colonial legislature. The Stamp Act was viewed by the American colonists as a means of censorship a knowledge tax on the rights of the colonists to write and read freely. This will be our last one for the day. In order to be able to politically speak, you have to understand the foundation of our legal system. Otherwise, how can you defend the Constitution? How can you defend that all men are created equal if you don't understand the founding that Thomas Jefferson is basing that on? How can we justify the American Revolution if you don't understand those 4 liberty documents? See what I'm saying? So, if done, I believe, the way I'm doing it, yes. If done the way our textbook in that closet says to do it, no. That's my opinion. No. Yes. Yes. I read, research, and put it together myself.